Today we are going to review factoring. Factoring in general is when we took a trinomial and we figured out the two binomials that we multiplied together to find that trinomial. We attacked this by putting this in this box grid layout here, and we factored rows and columns, and we found common factors between them. So when we go through this, our binomials are going to appear on the top. We looked at these two terms and we figured out what they had in common, and we compared constants and variables. So they don't have any variables in common because only one of them has the x here. But 2 and -6 have a positive 2 in common. -3x and x squared, they don't have a constant in common, but they do have an x in common because they both have one of them. So they have a common factor of x. 2x and x squared, nothing with the constants because we've got 1 and 2. Well, they do have a 1, but we don't normally write the 1. X squared and x have an x in common. And then down here, -3x and -6. No variable, but -3 and -6 have a -3 in common. And then before you finally write down your answer here, make sure that it multiplies back out. X times x gives you x squared, x times 2 is the 2x, -3 times x gives you -3x, -3 and positive 2 gives you -6. So that means x minus 3 times x plus 2 is equivalent to the stuff inside the grid. Now you could have written this x plus 2, x minus 3, because it doesn't matter which order we multiply in, but you do not need to write them both, but just so we understand they are the same thing. All right, we're going to do the same thing here. Now this one's a little bit different because we have a number in front of x squared, but it's still going to work the same way when we look at the factoring inside the grid. 2 of these values at a time. So they don't have anything in common with the variable, but -15 and -9 have a -3 in common. 6x and 10x squared. Well, they both have an x, so we can write x right here. 6 and 10 both have a common factor of 2. Now we're going to work this way across the rows. X and x squared, so there's an x here. -15 and positive 10. They have a 5 in common. We'll work this way. We've got 6 and -9. That's going to give us a positive 3. And they don't have a variable in common. And then we're going to double check ourselves. 5 times 2 is the 10. There's the x squared. 5 times the -3 is -15, and it gets 1x. 2x times 3, there's our 6 and an x, and that worked perfect. So this is going to be 2x minus 3, 5x plus 3. Or you could reverse those two things inside the parentheses. It didn't matter. Now, this is how we work this once we have everything filled in. To tackle these last two, we don't have all 4 of these numbers filled in. And if we notice our trinomial, we think about the word tri, only has 3 terms in it. So the problem here is we need to figure out how to split this middle term up into this diagonal. So the first term goes in the top left-hand corner. Our last term, this -28, goes down here. Now we need to figure out how to split the 10 up. So the way that we will do that is we're going to take the front number and the last number and multiply them together. So this is 2 times -28. So if we go 2 times -28, we are going to get -56. Now what we want here is we want to find the factors of 56, and we want to figure out which factors of 56 give us 10. And the reason we have this negative here is what I want to do with those two factors is I want to subtract them. So I need to pick 2 numbers that will multiply together to give me 56 that I can subtract to give me 10. So as we go through this and we make this list, let's see, we're going to have 1 and 56, 2 and 28. What about 3? Will 3 work? Well, how do we determine that? We're going to go 56, so we're going to divide it by 3 and see if we get a whole number. It gives me 18.6, so 3 is not going to work. 4 does, though. So let's do 56 and divide it by 4, and we get 14. And what we see right here is that is going to work. 4 and 14, because 14 minus 4 gives me the positive 10 that I wanted right here. It doesn't matter what order they come in, as long as we get this right. Now what this tells me is that the two coefficients that are supposed to go in here, -4 and 14, because when I add those together, that's how I get this 10, and they're both supposed to have an x. Now that we have all 4 parts of the box filled in, we can just common factor. So -4 and -28 have a -4 in common. Then we're going to work here. We have the x with these, and 2 and 14 have a 2 in common. Now we factor this way, 2 and 4. Now this one's a little bit tougher because I didn't pull out the common factor first. So we kind of need to look at this and check this in case we don't pull out a common factor, because all these coefficients were divisible by 2. But we would normally say this has a 2 in common. Problem here is that I want this number times whatever here is to give me 2. Well, the only way that works is if that's 1. That means that has to be an x. So you do need to check those as you work through. So 14 and 28. Those also have a 14 in common for this one, but if I make that 14, 14 times 2 gives me 28. So 2 times what gives me 14? Tells me that should be 7, and it's going to be positive because 7 times -4 needs to give me -28. Now the reason that happened is there's a common factor of 2 in this that we'll have to factor out at the end. So let's write down what we have. We have 2x minus 4, and we got x plus 7. So it was pretty close to right, but what you really need to do, what we probably should have done in the first place before we started, was we should have factored out, we should have looked at all 3 of these coefficients here and seen if they had a common factor. I didn't, and I kind of did that intentionally because it's a real easy thing to miss, but you want to pull it out there at the end, and that would be what this is, completely factored out. 2 times x minus 2 times x plus 7. All right, let's try this last one. Now, we learned a special way to factor this. This was called the difference of 2 squares. And what that said is if we had a squared plus b squared, I'm sorry, minus b squared, that would factor into a plus b times a minus b. Now, if you don't remember that, it's not the end of how this works. We can still factor this the way that we just talked about on the other one. This is really x squared plus 0x minus 9. So we can still do this the way that we did before. X squared goes here, -9 goes here. This has a 1 and a -9. So 1 times -9 is equal to -9. So we want to subtract the factors of 9 and get 0, because that's the number that's in the middle this time. So let's see, we have 1 and 9 and 3 and 3, and the only ones that are going to subtract to make this work are 3 and 3. So that means this should have been -3 with an x and +3 with an x. Common factor, we're going to get -3 here. We're going to get x right here, because there's nothing in common with the coefficients, but they do have an x. Same thing here, nothing with the coefficients, just an x. And right here, we're going to get a +3. Double check to make sure it multiplies out, and it does. So we get x plus 3, x minus 3. So we're going to do lots of factoring and all the stuff that we're going to talk about the next week or two.